I have been approached. The song has been sung, and the council had to be convened. Apparently, the Council of Monster Hunters had to come together in a meeting, and they sent their envoy to communicate with me and try to reach a negotiation about where we go from here. It was an interesting turn of events, my friends, but let's get you caught up. Welcome back to our journey through Monster Hunter World. We're 160 hours in now, and it was seemingly coming to an end because our final fight has actually perfectly come together in what I like, and this is going to be, for anybody who's been joining us for this ride, you will be like, this makes no sense to me. I don't like it. It's weird, but honestly, if I can strike this perfect balance where we are just about good enough to overcome a challenge, if we play really, really well, I get enormous satisfaction from that. I'm so happy. I am never more annoyed in any video game in the history of ever than when we just win. I'm not interested. I forget about it. I move on. And we have struck that balance with Dr. Alatreon. We have struck that so well. Honestly, if it wasn't for the case that we had a couple of pulls where we were very, very close, I would have gone and got better gear. Because there's way, way more powerful stuff out there that we can access quite readily. But it is doable. And it's a stubborn thing. I know it's a stubborn thing. All logic, and I would just want to be clear, I would totally do this normally in a casual setting, is I would just go and get stronger, because all that stuff is there, and it's not even difficult for me to do. But we're right there, and there's just something about that rare opportunity that I get in video games to be like, oh, this is kind of like perfect, right? And I look to, if you missed these previous playthroughs, like Final Fantasy X versus Omega was exactly like that, where it was doable, but we had to do some absolutely funky shenanigans to get around those super bosses in order to defeat them. And when we did it, it's just monumental. It's monumental. It's so fun. It's so good. And that is where we are with Alatreon. But obviously, from what I'm telling you, is Alatreon still lives. Yes, Alatreon still lives. Here's the thing. I don't know how close I am to killing it. What I can tell you is that I have survived four of its room-wide AoEs, which are apparently called Escabars. I've gone through 4 of those, and it's still alive. It was still alive, and at that point, I was just, how much HP does this boss have? How much does it have? Because I had to survive all the way there without ever getting carted at all. And it was just kind of very heavily enraged. I was also 25 minutes into the fight at that point. And that's 25 long minutes, by the way. That is 25 very intense minutes where every hit you take pretty much is going to take you down to the next hit will kill you. And that's relentless, right? The fight just never really has a downtime period in it. And I just couldn't figure it out. Now, let's go over what needs to happen, because one thing I've noticed is, I did have the chat open for this, is we can obviously do more damage. There's, you know, better uptime. All these things are what we've been working on throughout the day. But with the way our setup is right now, there are things people are used to happening in this fight that just don't happen for us. And when they actually saw it, it was kind of interesting. It's like, what? This is just not this bit, like breaking the horns, right? Breaking the horns just isn't that hard. It's not that hard. And then when they actually saw me dump like full combos into it and whacking away at it, and it's still not break, that's when people were like, oh, okay. This is a little different. This is not quite how it was for me, and that kind of thing. But at the same time, we can do way, way better. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm not trying to put out the story of like, oh, I'm so feeble and so weak, like I'm just tickling it. That's not the case. There's so much room for improvement here. There's infinite opportunities to increase your output in this game if you just get slightly better. you time things slightly better, and you just have slightly better positioning. All the things start to fall into place. Maintaining good sword and axe uptime, so you're fully amped up and you're doing tons of damage. All that stuff is definitely doable, and that's what I'm working on. But it's still extremely hard. To the point where to rely on this is what I need to do. If you don't understand this fight, and that became very apparent as well, as a lot of people have no idea how this fight works. And I wonder if that's a case of they've always done it multiplayer, and therefore somebody else was doing it, which would be a very classical experience for me in MMO games, where, you know, Mythic Plus in World of Warcraft would be a prime example of that, of people getting very high score, but they're not the ones that are actually doing the things that are enabling that to happen. They're just like doing damage or whatever. Or is it a case of they've never needed to because things have happened naturally because of just the fact that they do a lot of damage and therefore things happen? Because Monster Hunter World swings rapidly. We've talked about this. Any slight power increase you get not only increases your power but also decreases the power of the enemies. It like double dips because they get stunned more often and so on and so forth. So the situation was, to reliably get to where we needed to be, you have two things that you must achieve in each phase of the fight. And then what I believe happens is the fight fully resets. When it goes up into the air and it does its giant AoE, the fight fully resets. Like, it cleanses any of its current statuses. It resets all its bars that need to be filled up. And you have to start the fight again. So if you achieve these things early in one of the phases, you get like a little period where you're just doing damage. You can do whatever you want. You're just reducing the boss's HP bar. But once it hits that AoE, the fight restarts to do the two things. The two things are, you have to knock him over. That has to happen. Otherwise, the AoE will just kill you. And it'll use one of your deaths. Now, you can obviously come back after that if you want to do that. But it puts you in a really bad situation where you don't have any leeway for later on. And certainly if you're going to survive like 4 of these things, like I have to, I'm pretty sure I have to do that, then we can't afford that to happen at all in any way, shape, or form. We can't be like, oh, I didn't get the knockover. Like, that's it. It's GG at that point. Like, the fight is over. How do you do that? Well, it's very apparent that I think people just overall, in before Alatreon joined the game, didn't really lean too heavily into elemental weapons, because you have to swap them a lot versus like a straight up just raw damage weapon. Like, this enemy is weak to ice, but it's not. The next enemy you fight is weak to fire, and it's not weak to ice, which means a lot of swapping around of weapons. Great for completionists and collectors, but for people who just want to do the next boss, that's kind of an annoying prospect to deal with as you're working through the game. So it seems to me that probably a lot of people just didn't bother with that and just stayed with raw flat damage because it was just overall better. And the difference wasn't enough to make it a problem, right? It's just like, yeah, I can do more damage if I did X and Y, but it's not super necessary for how I play the game. I can just bonk everything to death. So Alatreon came in and very specifically was like, you need elemental weapons for this fight. Like, you have to. They force it on you. So how do they force that on you? Alatreon takes bonus elemental damage, specifically, I believe, based on the journal, on the front legs, and it's other parts of its body. It specifically takes up a lot. It has a very elemental weakness in those areas, right? And you need to build that up, because that's the only way of knocking him over. You have to build up your elemental damage, and I believe it's only elemental damage that counts towards this, onto that body part, or those body parts, in order for him to fall over. If he doesn't fall over, then the damage of his room-wide AoE will kill you regardless of what you do. You cannot survive it. There may be some obscure, very super endgame setup that can survive it, but it is designed wholeheartedly to annihilate you. Even if you fully heal your entire HP bar, it doesn't matter. It's going to kill you again and again and again. So you have to get that knockover in between each phase, and every time it goes up and does its AoE, it'll reset the time, the amount of elemental damage you need in order to knock it back over again. Second thing, you have to destroy its horns. Why? Well, firstly, the horns are only vulnerable for about 50% of each phase. At the start of the fight, when he's like just a straight up dragon, you can't damage or weaken the horns in any way, shape, or form. And then it will swap to an elemental form. That's when you can destroy the horns. So you can't do anything to them before that. You can't like start working on the horns early and break them very quickly. That doesn't work. They're only vulnerable during this period of time. If you don't break the horns, he will swap elements. And that means that your elemental weapon, because you can only bring one weapon. We saw this regularly as well. It's like, can't you just bring more weapons? You can't swap weapon. Now, I think you could technically do it if you go to your item box if you die and change weapons on the fly there to try and keep it going. I don't have access to that, so technically I think you can. But the idea is that you can only bring one weapon to the fight. And if you don't break the horns, he will swap to your element, and therefore you can't do any damage anymore because you can't build elemental damage onto the boss to get the knockover, right? It's a snowballing effect. Now, what that means is that each phase we have to knock him over and break the horns. Now, in principle, with a lot of damage, that's actually not very difficult to do. For us, it's very, very hard to do. And the only reliable way that I got this done, it is entirely doable without doing this. We had to do it a couple of times. It's like, we're going to have to go old school. We're going to have to try and eke this one out. But it's way more reckless gameplay, which can lead to death, is wall banging him. However, wall banging does about like 80% of the horn damage. I actually think it hits for like 1,000 damage. I think it's all head damage. It's literally all head damage, which means 1 or 2 hits. And if you got those 1 or 2 hits earlier on, then it'll just break the horns, and you can just work on the actual monster itself. Without that, though, it was a lot of extra damage we had to find from somewhere to try and make this work. So the problem with wall banging is the walls in the room are, I think there's 4 of them. They're extraordinarily thin, really thin. Which means if you're not right next to the wall, you can't control the turn of the monster in a precision way. It turns 90 degrees. So if you are not right next to the wall to give you a much smaller arc to send the boss out, we've had this a few times where he just runs slightly to the left, even though you're like looking at it. You know, you're looking pretty close to it. He will, and you're not that far away. He will run slightly to the left or slightly to the right, and it won't count. And that is the worst thing ever. The second worst thing ever is when you grip onto the head in order to do this, and you're in a great position, is he launches an animation that prevents it from happening. Typically, this is he's decided to go flying, to actually fly. And if he's decided to, even though he's grounded and you're on the head, if he's decided it's time to fly, you will fire it off to whack him into the wall, and he will just take off anyway, and he will just ignore you and do whatever you want to do, and then you're like, okay, now we got a flying phase where I can't do any head damage, really. There will be, and this is one of those things, like, if you are extremely well-versed in this fight, I'm sure there is a certain thing you can do, a very specific animation where you can do something to the head. But primarily, you're whacking toes for very little damage. I actually found this as, like, a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you can do some damage to him. You can whack his feet, and there are occasional points you can cling on. The actual best one I found is if he's doing the headbutt. If you do a roll specifically on the final headbutt and then immediately clutch claw as the head lands, you can shoot him and ground him and do some big damage. If you can pull that off, it's really good. Sometimes it goes on the cats, which is very annoying, and sometimes he's doing like the third one, 3 if he's enraged. You've got to keep a track of all these things while it's going on. Either way, it's a complex fight in order to get reliably through to the latter half. The cool thing is, though, once the horns have been destroyed twice, you don't need to worry about the head anymore, or breaking the horns, because he hasn't got any horns left. Now you're just kind of working the boss and trying to get the knockover, because he's still going to do the AoE in the room, he's just not able to swap forms anymore. So it became, like, a mixed bag. Here's the thing that happened, and I will be the first to tell you that I definitely threw this fight twice. I wouldn't call it a choke, but I'm sure many people will. The problem I ran into after doing so many pulls, I think we did like, I don't know, 25 attempts or something yesterday, maybe more, is that the fight is so long and you've done so many. I actually went late streaming last night to try and kill this, that you forget if you've toppled or not. And there was a couple of times where it felt 100% in my mind, especially when we were like 17 minutes into the fight, that he just got into the AoE, and I was like, we haven't been able to achieve our things. And I was sort of like throwing my hands up like, oh, we're so close and we're not getting it. And it actually, I had toppled it at some point during that phase and could have survived. that AoE. That absolutely happened, and it was when I realized it in one of the tries. I actually realized it like midway through the animation. I was about to leave the mission. I was like, I think I actually did topple him, but I toppled him like, I don't know, 30 times that day, and it's just one of those things like where you're 17 minutes in and it requires really solid concentration, is that you just forget that you actually did do it at some point. Especially when you're knocking him out the air or you wall banging him. There's lots of occasions he's lay on the floor and you're like, did I get the topple or not? It's something I need to work on. So I think we should have killed this yesterday, probably twice, and didn't, which was where we got up to. Now, as I came to the end of my stream, Rurakan, who has been doing the podcasts regarding my little journey here, just put in my Twitch chat, like, can we talk for a minute? And I was like, oh, did I bugger something up on the podcast, or did I take some information away that wasn't accurate and he wanted to clarify or something like that? So I jumped to the call, and this was on stream, so you can see it. I was like, what's up? He's like, okay. So I saw your title of the stream and your Twitter message. You're doing Alatreon as the last boss. And I was like, yeah, I think so. Alatreon is clearly a substantial challenge for where we are in the game. That feels like an appropriate end boss. And in order to move on to Fat Alice, as was brought up, is like, it does require some amount of just like grinding in order to have just a power level that's capable of doing Fatalis first time. We also ran into this yesterday of people like comparing a first kill without knowing anything versus somebody who's killed it 1,000 times and is now speedrunning it. That whole thing really winds me up because it's so stupid. So stupid. He's like, right. So we've had a meeting, and I was like, who's had a meeting? The Council of Monster Hunters have been summoned to the table. And I was like, have you been sent as like an envoy, like as a diplomat on behalf of the Council of Monster Hunters? He's like, kind of, yeah. And we've been working away trying to come up with a quote-unquote budget gear set that we believe is viable to have a good college try at Alice. And here's the thing. We, in the Monster Hunter community, for Monster Hunter Wilds, do not really consider Alatreon to be the last boss. We consider Alice to be the final boss, right? Everything else is whatever, but Alice is the one. Alice is the final boss. And to finish this journey without doing Alice would be sad. And I was like, right. I was like, but isn't there... I'm now aware that what you're supposed to be doing, Alice, with, like, augmented gear. That's what it was designed for. Whether people can do it without it is irrelevant. I don't care. It's designed with that in mind. Such as the ability to, like, heal yourself by doing damage and things like that, which you can't do yet. Right? And so things like that with way more gem slots, way more attack, way more agitator, way more blah, 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 whatever it is. Just way more bonuses and things strapped to your character. And just way significantly more powerful gear than we have. And it's like, we think we've come up with a gear set that we can get probably within a couple of hours, which will be close enough to viable. I don't know what that means. And that's what's been left with me. That situation. Because people are apparently very upset that we were stopping at Alatreon and not Alice. I'll tell you guys now. I have not made a decision on this. For a couple of reasons. Monster Hunter Wilds is coming out within a few weeks. A break from Monster Hunter would be a good thing. Instead of going from Monster Hunter into Monster Hunter. We are a variety content channel because I love variety. Something taking my mind off, doing something else, and having fun elsewhere is a very, very good thing. And we actually have, well, I don't know what it is, because our good lady Bex, who edits these videos, is actually choosing our next game. It's already lined up, and they've been working on stuff in the background. My team's been working on things. And I was like, I feel like... Yes, we can wear this gear set where it is, again, quote-unquote doable, but we're going to be here for like 2 weeks trying this. So here's what I will say is we're obviously going to take a look at Alice. That was always the plan. I said that yesterday. We're going to take a look at it. I'll get a feel for it. Now, here's my fear. Once I get a look at it and get a feel for it, I'm going to want to go for the kill. And I don't know if that's a good decision or not. I don't know. But it is interesting that the council has been convened. They have sent their envoy. They've been working on things. So, I mean, I'm kind of smiling because I'm like, I know I'm going to do this. But first of all, Alatreon must die. I don't know how close I am to killing this. For all I know, I have to do another 2 AoEs. I have no idea. I really don't know how far away. I feel like we're near the end of the fight because he's got no horns left for doing things. I feel like we're near the end of the fight, but goddamn, man. On that 25 or 26 minute pull, and I had reasonably good damage, I was like, how much health does this thing have? Holy crap. Well, that's where we're at. Let me know what you guys think down below. Do we have to do Alice, or is it fine? I don't know. Bye, guys.